Welcome to another episode of Prime Focus, the program that highlights issues of concern to individuals, families, and communities, bringing awareness, bringing education with a view to enlightening people, creating positive action for a better future. Tonight, we are continuing a second in a two-part series with our guest who was on with us last week. We had a very exciting time last week. And if you missed the session last week, I'll encourage you to go and pick it up because we talked about how childhood trauma affects adult life and also knowing your A scores. And we discuss a lot of beautiful things. So if you missed that, please go back after this episode and watch that. That may give you a fuller picture. Nonetheless, tonight's episode is truly loaded. I warned you ahead of time it was going to be explosive, and I hope you're ready. And so if you haven't done so already, get on the line, get your friends, share the link, share it, share it, share it, so that they can join us tonight. Enough of that. Let me introduce our speaker tonight because Ibironke John is back with us tonight, as I said, in this second episode. And tonight we are going to be looking at something very exciting. We're going to be looking at post traumatic growth, how it happens, who it can happen for, and then also looking at healing from childhood abuse. We know many in our communities go through many things, and oftentimes it's either a taboo, it's not spoken about, and so hush, 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 and all that. But tonight, she's going to bear it all in a nice way to help each one of us so that we can create a better society, stronger families. So I'm going to play the introduction so that we can bring Ibironke in for tonight's session. Ibironke John is a proud mother of three young adults, each pursuing their God-given calls. She is a survivor and thriver of adverse childhood experiences. She is the author of Love Broke the Silence, written in the pseudonym Serena Peters. This is an engaging book that contains a story of overcoming childhood abuse. Ibironke qualified and for several years worked as a social worker and a probation officer, where she worked with clients with complex needs and mental ill health. Ibironke later qualified as an integrated trauma care specialist. She now offers awareness programs and trauma coaching services from both her lived and professional experiences. She is an advocate in raising awareness of child abuse amongst Black and ethnic minorities and is passionate about enabling faith communities to adhere to safeguarding procedures for the vulnerable in their care. Ibironke has been interviewed on Revelation TV and Premier Christian Radio. She loves dogs and creating healthy food menus. Ibironke, good evening to you and thank you for joining us again on Prime Focus.
Thank you.
Wow. All week, I've just been thinking about this session. As a matter of fact, from your last session we did a week ago, the days seem to have gone so fast. And I was like, okay, I'm waiting for this episode. I thought we had a wonderful time in the last episode, but I just knew today was going to be. And I've had people checking up on me on the different things that we've been talking about. But last week's episode, I'm sure maybe some people would have reached out to you as well and all that. But I mean, it's just been different people wanting to know more, telling me this is fantastic, we should keep having conversations like this. So I'm so pleased that you made yourself available so we could have this discussion tonight. I want to start because some people have said, okay, what exactly is post-traumatic? Yeah, we know trauma, but what's post-traumatic growth? So I want to start from there, then we can pick it up with the other things that I know you're already raring to go about. What exactly is post-traumatic growth?
Well, thank you. So thank you for having me. And, my greetings to everyone that's tuning in and listening. So yes, my name is Ibironke. I thought I might tell you what the meaning of my name means. It means something to cherish. And, I realized and found my own purpose after my own post-traumatic growth. And well, post-traumatic growth is really when somebody has more or less experienced, or I would say, complex trauma, or what we call PSTD, that is post-traumatic stress disorder. I am a living example of someone who encountered multiple traumas, multiple abuse, which led to some sense of trauma. I did not have a formal assessment. However, on looking and reading the books, I can see that there were many signs. And most of them are no longer relevant in my life. But sometimes you sometimes find out that you still have a little bit of healing. So just to go back to last week, because last week was really interesting, and I hope it was engaging. I hope it was mind and thought, triggered your thoughts and questions, because the whole idea is for the community to heal. When the community heals, there'll be healthier people. Then the community can function properly. And right now, there are some percentages about how COVID has affected so many people, the triggers, how it's affected people's mental well-being, health, how COVID has affected relationships as well. So the fact that we're having this interesting conversation, especially for the Black and ethnic minority, is important. I'll tell you a bit more about my background, because last week I didn't cover as much as I really should have or could have. And this week we're warming up. So I'd like to share a bit more about my journey, where I'm coming from, and why I'm so passionate in what we're discussing tonight before I start to go into the rest of the contents. So I've said I experienced 15 and a half years of being sexually abused. And that was with a lot of violence, physical violence. There was neglect. There was a lack of emotional attachment with my mother. And just generally growing up in a household where you didn't see the violence anymore, but you could feel it. My mom was really scared of my dad. Now, as a child, when you try to make sense of that, you can't. The only thing you do is to survive. And that's what I was doing. So my coping strategies for that to survive as a child was, one, to realize what my priorities were. My priorities was to keep myself and my two brothers, who I had a strong affection for, safe. The second one was to learn how to appease my dad. Unfortunately, I did become the appeaser, the mediator, in a very negative way. But can I say to us as well, out of that became this resource that was already God planted within me, to be an advocate, to use psychology. So I remember on one particular occasion when my dad he became very violent. He just woke up. My brothers didn't do anything wrong, but he just decided that he was going to beat all of us in succession. So he started with I think my elder brother, my junior brother, I can't remember which one. But all I know is that as he was beating, and he's not just beating, saying, "Come on, with my little cane, here we are." He's really becoming really violent and without any control. So I kind of stood around him in a safe spot and said, "Daddy, whatever we have done, whatever I said to him, I know that you're angry. I know that we must have done something that's accumulated to this amount of anger that you're experiencing. Well, whatever we've done, I ask you to just forgive us. We're sorry." When I said that, it was like cold water was poured on the mad behavior, should I say, and he stopped beating us. So I learned from a very early age that you could use psychology, and that's become a strength now. Hence, we're having this discussion. Now, post traumatic growth or childhood growth is a concept, or it's a phenomenon which you experience when you have experienced or been exposed to childhood trauma. And what it means is that rather than staying stuck, you now use certain concepts, behaviors, growth. There's so many um, there's so many things you hold on to that help you not to be stuck, but you use it literally as a weapon. You use it to redefine your experience of the world. You use it to redefine the pain, the psychology of what you've experienced, the relationships, the breakdowns, and etc. So it becomes what we call a growth because unlike before, maybe the person was um maybe they had a substance misuse addiction because they were self-medicating because of the pain, but now you're able to develop yourself. You're able to look at more positive choices. It's not a positive choice to take cocaine and heroin, which we do know that a lot of people that take heroin is because there's a lot of pain. So now you're able to develop. Maybe you have a belief in God. You seek, is there a God? Is there a meaning for my life? Maybe you seek to adjust your relationships, toxic relationships, just become strong enough not to um, be an appeaser and a pleaser, not to be approval addicted. I mean, I know I had that issue really strongly. I was always addicted to approval, and I was also at the other hand of rejection. And that's why I like to work with people who've experienced what I call severe rejection, because I, for a long time, carried that like a rope around me. It was almost like a cloak. So, post um, traumatic growth is when you've been able to become stronger within you. Perhaps the voices that used to say that person used to die, they're not there. You find a purpose for living. You find growth. You find that even though the pain, you cannot stop the pain that happened and you can't go back. But one thing you can do is learn to move forward, and you can learn to embrace life. Importantly, you learn to embrace yourself. You learn to accept yourself, find value for yourself, and realize that you're not a ghost floating on the planet Earth. You've got meaning, you've got personality, you've got your own psychological nature, you've got values, you bring strength, and you're strong. All these are great ways of knowing. Another one I want to quickly add, because I know we are a faith community, probably listening onto this channel right now, is that sometimes when someone's experienced so much trauma in their life and so complicated and complex, we do need to be able to find that post traumatic growth by now saying, I will go and see a therapist. I will go and check in with my doctor. I'm not able to cope. That's also a growth. The reason why I say that is because the time of realization is very important. For anything we want to do, we have to realize there must be an awareness. Without the awareness, how can the change come? So part of seeking professional help is a form of leading yourself before you've been led, before you've been controlled. But now you're saying, no, I am going to do this. This is good for me. So it's leadership, as we know, is about leading others, but first of all, leading yourself and valuing yourself. So yeah, I hope I've answered that question in a nutshell before we
You have
go to any
more
other.
than answered it. I'll thank you again for bringing in the personal side of it, because now there may be somebody who is connecting or may watch this later and is saying, um, she's really relating to my situation and she's so bold to talk about what she's going through. Yes, that's why we're having this conversation. And it's important to know that it's not just the telling a story, but coming out of that situation to be able to tell an even better story of coming out of that trauma. And that's why Ibironke is here tonight. Thank you so much for that, Ibironke. Um, Now, you have somehow, if I may use or borrow the term, reinvented yourself. Uh, is it something that everybody can do, or what would it entail to get somebody to get to this state? I hope I'm not jumping ahead of myself. I know there's so much that you want to say, but just looking at you and somebody say, okay, well, was she lucky? What happened? Is it something that everybody can achieve? Maybe not to the same measure, but at least not stay in that rut.
Yeah, so, I mean, I would say that I've been on a long journey, and that's why I like to celebrate my birthdays, because it shows me the years in which I have come through, but also the years in which I now see there's been growth, There's been a decision to want to live. There's been a decision to enjoy the life. I'm a Christian, and I've listened to somebody called Joyce Meyer, and she used to have something called, the abundant life. And I've recognized, and that's become very important to me. What is abundant life? That my life that God's given me is important, and my life is a blessing. So what has happened to me was that I would count myself not lucky, but I would count myself blessed, just like anybody else listening is. When we have breath in our lungs and we can breathe, know that God's kept us. So for me, I happen to recognize some of the things in which some of the instances in which I can say God surely kept me. Now, what I had experienced, some people have not have experienced that, but some people have experienced more. And one thing I always say is that no matter what we've gone through, it's not about comparing. Oh, what you went through is really tough and worse than mine, or mine was worse than you. Any pain is a dysfunction to how God created us to be. When we've been neglected, when we've been abused, when we've been denied, when someone's walked out on us, when we've not had love from our parents or our grandparents, or maybe our parents died when they were early, when they were young. It could be any situation, but when there's been a what I would call an abuse, um, our lives become important. So to me, the most defining thing was I remember a time I made a decision, and I said, I am not dying like this, and that was a critical time in my life when I decided that I had to escape from my life from my father. And when I also decided that I wanted to live. There's a reason why I'm on this earth. So for anyone listening, maybe you've been in this cycle of abuse so long, and it's as if it's part of you. It's like you're wearing the normal clothes that you would put on. No, don't normalize the pain. Don't normalize the years of oppression that you've experienced. It is time to get help. You're listening, you're tuning in for a reason. And hopefully by the time we finish this session, you will also be equipped, because maybe you're also taking care of a child or a young person. Maybe the relationships have broken down because of the complex trauma. I have experienced a lot of things. And I would say that even though I am not necessarily talking from a profession, I'm not a therapist, but I have been a social worker, and I have worked as a probation officer. So I have worked with people with complex needs. But I am in this situation very much using my own circumstances. So my book is called Love Broke the Silence. And the silence for me was the years of oppression, was the years of psychological, physical, sexual, spiritual, financial, and um, abuse, and also seeing domestic violence. I hope that before we finish this show, we'll be able to see a slide that I kind of put up, because in it I highlighted that a child that is abused, and any of the four abuses I've just mentioned, but can also suffer harm from seeing their parents fight, the threats. In fact, if I want to take it further in this conversation, I will tell us that when a child is born, a baby, most of us have had the joy of seeing a baby born, or if it's not our child, our brothers or our sisters or our friend's baby, or a neighbor's child. You just look at the baby. When the baby's just been born, give it about 1 month or so. You look into its eyes. The baby follows your eyes. If you smile, smiles. If you coo, you coo. Whatever you do, they are reading a lot from your eyes. I'm sure we can all witness that. So that's an eyes. Those are eyes that smile. Those are eyes that show life, compassion, love, and etc. But you can imagine eyes that show fear, eyes that show anxiety, eyes that show deep worry, regret, hatred. The baby is going to form from that. And that's why, so just like a baby can smile when you smile, a baby can also form impressions of fear from the fearful eyes, agitation. And so, what we're talking about tonight is so important. If we want to see a healing community, if we want to see on a personal level our families, ourselves healed, then this is important that we get equipped, that we become more aware of what trauma is, and that we become more equipped and aware of what childhood abuse is, because it's happening around us. And so hopefully you'll see some of the slides, and I will talk a bit more also um, about what abuse is, the signs of abuse. We'll probably run through that as well. Because abuse is not just something that happens within the home, but it does. It can happen in school. It can happen in the communities, in faith communities, in safe places, in safe spaces. It happens online. There's online grooming. That is a form of abuse now. We know the classic ones called human trafficking and slavery. We know when young people are initiated into gangs, when they are making all these oaths and sworn declarations that they'll stand for each other, that sign of their manhood is that they can go out and kill somebody. That is abuse. But we've also know the other four classic ones, which is psychological. So psychological, which is, that could be to do with verbal abuse, that could be to, telling the person they're useless, they're silly, and etc. We also know there's what you call emotional abuse or neglect. They seem to be hand in hand. A good example is when, if you have a parent that is really depressed and can't be bothered to take their child to school, then they won't get out of bed, but they won't seek help for their own ill health as well. You see, that child, no matter what the excuses we may give, or no matter what the reasons may be for that parent, the fact is that child cannot get themselves to school. And without that parent seeking help, or without an agency, an organization, or social services being involved, how is that child going to obtain education that's going to help them? So if you can imagine that doesn't happen, that child will grow up without being able to spell, count, read, and when they get up, they can't, handle their finances, maybe, unless they do some extra courses. So there's always a ripple effect of childhood trauma, abuse, and it affects the society at large. Then you have people who maybe who've experienced, for example, childhood abuse, or abuse in their childhood. They might not feel confident. They will lose their self-esteem, or not have self-esteem, might not grow at all. They might not. They may be really intelligent, but they'll always try and put themselves down, because they can remember the voices of the past saying they're stupid. They wish they were never born. They tried to abort them, but they wasn't successful. Things like that, or they remind them of maybe a relationship. So the words are damaging, and we can. Part of this conversation tonight is how we can prevent. We all have a responsibility to safeguard children. I'm not saying that we behave like social services, that you go in and you can you have statutory rights. No, we don't do that. But what I mean is that we can all look out. We can all say something, maybe. We can all be concerned. We can all query. I remember many years ago, I was in a shop, and I saw this woman just hitting her child anyhow. I mean, the child was probably about 1 or 2. Now, you might say, well, that's a naughty child. No, that child was probably unsettled for some other reasons, but her way was using, I could see she was using a lot of aggression. And she wasn't, I don't think English was her first language. So I had to go to her and kind of break my English down. And I said to her, the way you're hitting this child, you will get yourself in trouble. You will get social service. I tried to explain to her. I don't know whether she fully understood, but she kind of moved away from me. What was I doing? I was drawing an awareness. I wasn't walking in ignorance and going my lovely way. I felt I had to say something. And so I'm not asking us to be busybodies in people's lives, private lives, but I'm asking us to be more concerned, to be more aware, so we can maybe prevent. If you know young people coming, maybe you're in charge of young people, and suddenly you have a young person always coming home late, or you see them in a group at night, there should be some kind of concern. You can't just say, well, that's what they do, these young people now do. No, maybe that person It's being forced, being coerced. And that does bring me to another point as well, that normally when we talk about child abuse, we're talking about the age group of under 16. But I want to lift it higher, because if you have a young person who has severe autism or any kind of disability, remember that they're more vulnerable. They're still trying to find who their friends are. So they need that consideration. Just because they're of a certain age bracket does not mean that they can make all the decisions for themselves. So if you know there's a parent or guardian not treating them properly, they're being neglected financially or something like that, you can't just say, well, the child's about 22, 21 anyway. No, that child, if that child has what we call special needs, you should still be concerned.
Hmm.
So
Awesome. I mean, there's so much in there. I wanted to bring up a point there. I know you mentioned social services. I'm not going to open a kind of worms on that one now. Maybe if you want to say something about that later, because sometimes people have certain misconceptions. I wanted to rather throw a different question. It may come up in the slides that you mentioned, which we can put up whenever you're ready. But there's a question here. Can somebody be better equipped in their safeguarding role to children in their care, not necessarily their own? It could be a school situation and things like that.
yeah, they can, because there are so many programs. So in the slide I've put up, you have organizations like NSPC, you
Mm,
have AVA, you have in every area there's social services and there's a safeguarding board. You can read up on it.
mm,
You can become educated. You can become more aware. Because let's say, to take the classic example of online grooming, how do we protect our children? How do we protect the young people? If we are a pastor, a minister, what are some of the things you can talk about in church? Can you have signboards? Can you put something up whereby young people can feel that they can come and see you, or come and see somebody else if they want to see you if you're older? Maybe they can have buddies or mentors, trusted buddies or mentor system. Because young people are going through a lot of pressure. A lot of the pressure that young people are going through are, I would say, on two fronts right now: the sexual side of it, and also the bullying and harassment stroke gangs. And with that comes drugs as well. If I'm to add to it, I would say, because there's been a mental ill health crisis within the all over the world globally, let's not take a young person for granted. Let's recognize that our safeguarding, to be equipped with safeguarding, is to become more aware. When I was growing up, some of the pressures that we sense in society now were not as much. Now it's like, the world is going through so much. So, for example, a young person during the COVID time, to do their studies, as we know, most of them had to study online. But a lot of perpetrators, sexual pedophiles, were on these spaces as well, and posing as, maybe tutors, sessions, different things. So we have to become more aware. Don't we can't say my child knows better. Your child is a child. Your child is forming. If during COVID people began to have relationship problems, things that they were able to suppressed before became insurmountable, they burst. It's like a volcano bursting. Suddenly, the person they're living with, or they were able to manage it, by going out, going to work, doing different things, they distracted themselves. They could no longer become distracted. They recognized they had problems. I heard of one case, well, several cases of people that just felt like killing their partner. It was bad. So if that happens to an adult who has what we call self-control, what about to the young people who had to work on the computers? And now we've passed the COVID times, but to use the computers become most of the work, even that lecturers and tutors said, is still through the computer. Most of the learning is through the computer. So I would say that we need to become more aware of what is happening. There's so much brokenness amongst the young people. more than we've ever seen before. And like I said, the COVID, don't underestimate the damage it did. Um, I think I said last week that there used to be this saying that black don't crack. So if you're black, they say, oh, we don't crack. We're tough. We're tough. But that is a lie, because on the inside there's a lot of cracking going on. It's, again, I can liken it to a volcano. A volcano, you can just see the embers of the fire a little bit, and it looks like a maybe an iconic thing, part of nature. But the day a volcano erupts, people will run for their lives, because suddenly all that was inside begins to erupt, and it creates chaos and terror. So you can imagine when people have unresolved issues, unresolved hurts, guilt, shame, something done to them, something that's happening to them, something their eyes are seeing, something their ears are hearing, identity crisis. So we need to become more aware, and don't say, well, if you're, again, from the faith or from a traditional background, say, well, they dare not try that. My child would never try that because they know what they will get. No, there's something more than your threats, and more than your threats, and more than, well, they won't get any money from me for whatever. There's something that is pressing them more than that. In fact, there's money outside for them. So don't let's say come from that angle. There's options, horrible options, and horrible choices, and pressure. You know what pressure feels to you. So let's not forget what pressure feels to a young person.
Wow. Thank you. So engrossing in terms of the spectrum of cases and scenarios that you've presented, and that tells us that we're grappling with a problem that maybe for too long has gone unaddressed or has been inadequately resourced in terms of providing solutions. And I'm so thankful again for a program like this where you can come on and share a lot of insights. Before we go on, we will take a short break, but then I just thought to find out. I know you've been referring to these slides, and I want to make sure that you get the opportunity to share them. So, at any stage where you think maybe that's the point that you want the slides brought in, you can let me know so our audience can benefit from it. But on a second note as well, would it be something that people could access maybe later?
Yes, they can
Apart,
access the slides
yes,
later.
they can write. Okay,
Definitely.
okay. So I'm just going to let us take a minute and a half in terms of a break, and then we will come back. And those of you watching, thank you for joining us again. And please share the link, get your friends to join us. They shouldn't miss this because we are coming to the best part where she explains, breaks things down for us. Thank you. Focus is a twice monthly live streaming program on YouTube, which highlights issues of concern to individuals, families, and relevant communities, bringing greater awareness and education, with a view to improving the lot of many through anticipated positive actions. Join in our conversations and subscribe to the channel too. How can we reduce maybe the risk of child abuse? I know you've touched on something. Is this something you're probably going to look at in the slides, or is it okay to address it separately?
Yes, it is. It's quite relevant.
Okay.
Thank you. So we can reduce the risk of child abuse by becoming, like I said, aware. of how what abuse is. And I've already narrated about the 5 or 6 of them. The other one is what we call human trafficking, online grooming, gang, belonging to gangs. Also, what I would call cultural practices that are damaging, really. And for example, that could be causing a person to marry at a very early age. That could be some kinds of disciplines that are just not. They really border on physical abuse, but we might think no, they are. That it's okay. So I mean, for example, pulling a child's ear, say, "Have you heard me?" and saying it will help them, or knocking their head with a book and saying, "Make sure your head's screwed on," and things like that. To me, that's a cultural practice. They call it chastisement, but it's a harmful cultural practice, you know. So there are so many practices, and we have the common one, which is called FGM, which is still practiced in certain areas. And we, and even in FGM, there are about 4 or 5 strands to that. There's one where they sew the person up after. So there's so many practices that are wrong. And also the other one that we fail to recognize, and you could put it in any of the other categories, is what I would call spiritual abuse, because that is done, for example, and it can fall into any of the categories. So example, now you may not agree with me on this, but this is my opinion, okay, and I'll leave that to you. For example, if you know your child's got their exams, let's say GCSEs, and you take them to a prayer meeting every evening, or let's say 3 times a day, 3 times a week, they're not doing their homework, then how do you want them to pass? So I mean, they need to be able to get their education. Now, I do believe there's in sacrifice. I'm a Christian myself. So I do believe in prayer, and I do believe that taking your children to church or to wherever is good for them, to help them, but not to the point that they are neglecting something that's going to help them to the next part of their life, or that they can't sleep. So I think there's some things that are in between, and then maybe to accuse them or call them a witch, that is so bad. To get someone to come and tell them how they're a witch, you understand that there is a witchcraft in them. Now, even if you believe there is, I do believe in those things, but then you must make it in such a way that you're not creating fear in them, that you're not putting them in some kind of bondage, which you're trying to give them freedom, but that is not freedom. So those are some of the things I am referring to. They're cool. I'll call them gray areas. So these are some of the signs. Is it damaging your child to be telling them some prophetic word that they can't even understand? I'm not talking about words that help them to have a goal and a vision, but something that puts a responsibility. So, for example, saying, "Well, when God told me that Uncle so and so is got 10 demons and all that," a child doesn't need to understand that. So I think we need to just be careful how whether we're damaging our children or not. So those are what I call the gray areas, but they're the obvious areas. And so to prevent child abuse is to become more aware, but also to become aware of how does these things happen. I mean, for example, I always go for the one which is called sexual and physical abuse, because there's. But if you talk about sexual abuse, do you just allow anyone from your hometown come into your house and sleep into you near your children? No, nothing, not just because they're maybe your grandmother's uncle's cousin or whatever. In these days we have to realize that there's been a breakdown in family relationships, in family honor, in family dignity, in family values. There's so much, people are so broken, and yet there are people that are manipulating the closeness of traditional relationships, that they know as long as they can call me uncle, I get my way in, or because the person is going to teach your child a less some maybe a subject. You can't leave your child with that person. You should do your due diligence. If you're a minister or a leader, just because someone prophesies and speaks in so many tongues, you can't allow them to be in control of it. Maybe a child or children, without having some safeguarding around that. Everybody should be accountable to a next spear, if you understand. And also, another way to prevent, possibly to prevent this, is when we talk about bedroom sharing. If you have a 14 or 15-year-old opposite sex sharing the same room, I'm not saying that these things don't happen because of the way where people present themselves, but at least you can be able to talk. At least you can be more aware. Don't say, well, in our days it was fine. In your days, those days were your days. Now we're in new days. So these are some that there are so many ways which we can become aware. Someone moving into your home, for single people, especially for a woman, just because I mean, I believe I'm talking to people who have a faith, and they obey they have a faith in God, in the Bible and the Ten Commandments. But I'm also aware that people might not be practicing that. So I'm just going to address it from a wide spectrum. You can't just allow any man to come in and move into your home, and your child starts calling him uncle or daddy just because you're intimate with that person. You don't know that person. You are the person building a relationship with him. But your child, you don't know his past. So these are some of the ways we can be more aware.
Yeah.
We can also become aware that when people have mental ill health, they might need more help. They might be very vulnerable. If someone has mental ill health issues or severe, I'm talking about medium to high, for example, where they're hearing voices, where they're experiencing psychosis, maybe they're already engaging with the mental health team and they have a consultant. But sometimes we need to be more aware that that person might have the time that they have a breakdown period, especially if they're not taking their medication, or the medication has been changed, or they move into a new area. So if you are a family friend or relation or whatever, be more aware. Don't just say, well, I know they won't harm their child. Unfortunately, I was involved in trying to help somebody like that, but didn't take their medication. It wasn't the person's fault. It was just a total breakdown. And the person ended up harming their child. Thank God the child survived, but the scars are there. The emotional scars are there. And it took social services to become involved. So what I'm trying to say, never take things for granted. Don't say, oh, well, I know they wouldn't cross that line. I know they would never do that. Sometimes when people have experiencing severe ill health problems, you don't know the degree unless they feel comfortable in being honest with you. So these are the ways we can prevent um, child abuse from happening, becoming more equipped, helping another family. You might live with a family that have just moved into the area. They might be migrants. A cup of tea, just talking with them could help as well, to kind of deal with the stress, the personal stress that they might become experiencing. There's a number of ways, and I've just mentioned about a few, but there's so many ways.
Good. Awesome. I think it's a great point for me to put up maybe your slides if you want to talk through
Okay.
some of them. Yes, okay. So let me just pull them up one after the other, and then.
So I've gone through this a little bit already, and what I've said here is that bonding starts from the womb. So I've kind of gone through this, and
Okay.
and I said rejection and fear also start from the womb. So protecting yourself, taking measures to protect yourself if you are in a domestic violence relationship where you're experiencing any form of domestic violence, getting yourself out of that, or getting help and a remedy for that, is one way in which you can protect your unborn child.
Mm,
So trauma is real and can be picked up from the mother's womb.
awesome.
As you can see, the mother, that's an older person looking into the eyes of a child, and the child looking. The woman is smiling, the child is smiling. If that woman had so much fear or anger or rage or rejection or anxiety, that child would probably be showing the same thing. The child would look worried, tired, or worn out. So we can see that even facial expressions are so important. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
So we all need, I said here, we need all of us to take action. Safeguarding our children is everyone's responsibility, but we need to understand what abuse is. I hope we've got a bit of more, we've got insight. Some of this is not new to some of us already listening, but at least we can go back over it and hear it again.
Hmm.
So, safeguarding is referring to preventing psychological, physical, and emotional harm to children and young adults. I've said young adults with disabilities who are considered vulnerable, because a child normally, for the UK anyway, a child's anyone under 16. But I have to mention young adults who with disabilities, severe disabilities, who are vulnerable, who can't speak, who can't see for themselves, who can't sometimes think for themselves. They may be 21, but or their minds might be that like that of a child. They might not have developed mentally. So we need to think of those as well. And I think that that's an area where Black and ethnic minority communities need to get on board and ensure that we have safeguarding procedures. If you're a church, a voluntary organization, if you're a family looking after anyone's, your auntie's child and they've got a disability, know that they're vulnerable. Think about when they come from school. Are they protected? Have you left them, who's going to take care of them when they come home? Just because they are maybe 18 or 19, there's still other issues to consider there.
Right. Wow.
I've given us some figures. I have many, many more figures. I just want to go to the quote. I like this quote. And I said, please consider, so we can take a little moment. It says, it is easier to build strong children than repair broken men. If we do things right at the beginning, it is easier to build a strong child if we are fully equipped. But if we expose them to the types of trauma that we've mentioned already, and they become full-fledged men, what we call broken men, it's difficult to repair. It's difficult sometimes for an adult to look back and say, where did my rage come from?
Hmm.
Why is it that when I'm driving, I just find myself like to be a different person? Where did that come from? Maybe it came from the womb, we don't know.
Hmm.
Why is that some people can't commit to a relationship? They really love the person, but something in them, they sink, they withdraw. Why is it that some adults cannot accept just pure love? Think it's too good to be true. Why do some adults deal with undue suspicion? Now we all get suspicious, that's normal. But when it becomes an obsession, something that you're obsessed with,
Hmm.
why? So this is why we talk about strong children, better to build them, and it's easier than to repair broken men. And we have a lot of broken people in our communities. Now,
That's a real powerful quote there. Yeah.
yeah, and that's actually a black man, Frederick
Hmm.
Douglass. I just saw it.
Okay.
Um, More than half of 51% of adults who were abused as children experienced domestic violence in later life. That came from the Office of National Statistics, 2016. I've also said that it also says that survivors of all four types of abuse, physical, sexual, psychological, and witnessing domestic violence that occurred in their childhood, are likely to suffer the impact of that in their adult life. Safeguarding is everyone's concern, really.
Right.
You can see the little girl there. Today I was told my daddy doesn't love me anymore. So not all abuse is physical. It's not when a child is beaten up, that is abuse. Just telling the child that they're a mistake
Hmm.
is bad. That can kill the child's spirit and soul. Equally, we do know that where there's been domestic violence and black boys, a young boy has seen his mother beaten by her partner, the father. You know, it does something to disempower that man when he grows into his manhood. He either becomes very angry, he
Hmm.
may become very angry towards women, or he doubts his own manhood, because when he was a boy trying to form that makes sense, his manhood couldn't defend the woman who needed his what he would think was his protection.
Right.
So it is damaging. There, and again, safeguarding is about not just spotlighting what it is, but it's about preventing. And I hope we can be part of this movement of preventing harm to children, harm in the various categories we've mentioned. So when he talks about safeguarding as well, we're not just talking about um, promoting, the well-being as well. We're also trying to see how we can focus more on protecting those children who are, like I said, vulnerable or considered to be vulnerable, who would suffer from significant harm if we don't take an action.
Yeah.
So, mind our own business. If you hear someone screaming and shouting every day and say, well, this, we got to learn, that's how they do it. I don't understand those people, they don't have respect for people. Maybe we should be a bit more concerned. I know a friend of mine, um, don't want to give details because I'm sure she wouldn't want me to give much details, but taking care of in a youth ministry situation and a young person showing different behaviors, she knew in her heart that she shouldn't condemn this young person, but it was to ask the question, what happened to you?
Mm.
Last week in the last series, I touched on that, and we took it from, it was a quote that Oprah Winfrey mentioned, and there's another doctor as well, Dr. Nadine. Her name is Dr. Nadine Harris Burke in America. This has become the question, not why are you behaving like this? It's what happened to you. So anybody listening, you may be a teacher, a pastor, a parent, grandparent, a foster parent, just a sister or a brother, a nurturer, whatever. When we see people behaving, it's not just to criticize them and say, oh, these days and these young people. It it could be more, we could be asking questions like, what has happened to you? What would have caused you to behave like this, to think like this, rather than condemning and criticizing? That might be one way we can walk towards this journey of preventing. Because when we walk and talk like that and think like that in compassion, it will help us to think, well, maybe I need more skills. Maybe I need to equip myself. Maybe I need to do some more research. Maybe I can help. Maybe I can volunteer.
Mm.
Maybe I can have a cafe. You might be here and you have a cafe or hair salon. Maybe you have especially these chicken and burger shops.
Mm.
There were a lot of young people hang out. You could have posters that can signpost them for services, or it could be something that you could put up that helps them to, want to ring maybe childline or get help from, more specialist care. So we can't be indifferent and just go about our daily business. We need to be concerned because you may be the answer. I don't know if anybody heard about this story in the US. I think the story came out last year, but it was on the news. A couple came in. They were into a like a cafe or so, a restaurant, with two children, a boy and a girl. The girl, they ordered food for themselves and for, I think, the boy or the girl, I can't remember which one. But the boy or the other child, shall I say, they didn't. And the person serving noticed that their reactions were really brush and harsh towards that child. And you can see the child looking, their head looking down. Now, we may ignore that and think, ah, that child's been naughty. Maybe they should even be ashamed, let them be ashamed, let them put their head down. But there could be alarm bells. And I'm hoping that by today's talk, we can know when there are genuine alarm bells going on. For this woman, she realized this could be alarm bells. It's not just for me to mind my business and serve the customers. So she found a way, in a very tactful way of getting a piece of paper, and she scribbled, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I think those were the words. The child didn't make any, didn't acknowledge it. First of all, child just kind of looked, but then when she continued serving the family, she did it again. It came back and put it near the child. As she was serving them, she kind of put it for the child to see. I don't know how she did it. She put it under the table. I can't remember those details. But it's like, you need help. Are you needing help? Do you know what happened? Towards the end, the child then should. The child did something like this. Yes. And so I can't remember whether she called the police or whether she waited, but all we know, the police were called or social services. And it found out that they hadn't rescued that child, had been beaten, neglected, not been eating properly, lots of things that happened. That child, they said, would have died. So safeguarding, being aware is everyone's business. But we don't go around with our hats on, poking in. But when there's a genuine concern, things don't seem right, don't just ignore. You may be that source of help.
Powerful. This is so good. This is so good.
Okay. On this thing, I just want to really talk about what we call multiple traumas, and that can multiple, yeah, multiple traumas, which really leads to what we call complex trauma. And also to look at the figures, it says women who, so if you go to the second bullet point, it says women who were survivors of child abuse were more likely than men to experience abuse as an adult. Because when you look at the psychology of human beings, especially women, now this doesn't matter whether they're black, white, Asian, or what, it makes no difference. Normally, a woman who has been abused as a child, any other forms of abuse, is looking for love, affection, safety, but also because of what they've experienced, especially if it's what we call multiple abuse, they have learned to develop what I would call coping strategies, which are not always the best. They might withdraw. They might decide that, well, the people I can have a relationship with are people who are, going to really love me or like me and things like that, for who I am, or for who I am, or for or I do, who I am, but who I think I can trust. So they may have trust issues, but in having trust issues, they might also not trust the one who has a pure love for them. And
Mm.
so, haven't you heard of the statistics that goes on that a lot of women who've experienced child abuse go on to to experience abuse, domestic violence, because there's just something that is unresolved. There's just that cry within that person, still looking for hope, still looking for strength, misunderstanding what strength is. Is it strength is to be in a relationship with a man that will use his physical fist to be beating the person, or destroying the house and things like that? But unfortunately, it's a kind of inverted, or I would say perverted kind of attraction, would I say.
Right.
Attraction because something needs to be healed, something needs to be whole. I've also put a third point there, and that point, it's a message, it's a session on its own. Again, I am not claiming to be a therapist or a doctor, I am not, but I have got my own lived experiences. I have been reading, I have done some other sessions, and I've worked with people with complex needs who come on the same category. So what that third bullet point says, that and the adult survivors of child abuse could be more susceptible to a long-standing mental ill health, physical health problems, and others connected issues such as relationship problems, financial and educational. It's all true. If you just look at what we call a timeline, let's draw this into a scenario. A child, from the age of 5, the child doesn't have clean clothes. The mother is depressed. The father is abusive. The father also abuses the child, sometimes molests the child sexually, allows other people to come in. The mother, when the father's not around, the mother is abusing alcohol, and men come in and abuse her as well. They abuse the child. By the time that child grows up, they're going to be in a mess, except for the help of God, except for the help of the Almighty God. Now, that person is likely, I'm not saying must, is likely to go on to have long standing mental ill health. And that mental ill health doesn't mean that they have to end up in a mental institution. It means that maybe they need regular treatment, to have continuous therapy, to be under a consultant. So that's one of the things. They might, for example, have anxiety issues. They might have phobias. Sometimes some phobias, that's the consequence of child abuse, could be phobia. Phobias sometimes come from child abuse. They may have what we call OCD. Again, a disclaimer here. I am not saying that anyone that has OCD is because they've been abused. That would not be true. We're saying this could be a string, okay? So it doesn't have to be that it's always connected. But I'm saying sometimes it is. They could have physical health problems. I know somebody who is a medical doctor. She specializes in pain and like the limbs, the back and the arms. She said that many of the women who came to her had um, pain problems, back problems around their reproductive sides as well, problems around there. And most of them had been sexually abused. So there's also what you call problems because of the emotional issues that have been, that have gone on. So they're all connected, and then they can go on to have relationship problems, financial and education. I put educational there. We all know it because someone who's lost their sense of worth, confidence, who've been told that they're stupid, or they feel they cannot concentrate because they're not sleeping well, then how are they going to become educated? How are they going to concentrate? They might drop out of school. And the consequence of that is that they might not pursue the career they were gifted to have. So there's always a balance. I'm not saying that every case ends up in this way. Some don't. We've all heard of or I hope we've all heard of the film called Gifted Hands by a well-known neuro consultant in the US. His mother brought him up. She had mental ill health problems as a result of her husband walking out on her and being pregnant at a very young age and maybe lacking that support. But she was able to maneuver around that by checking herself into hospital. And then also when she could, she'll make sure that the sons were doing their homework. And that's how he came to be a famous doctor. So I'm not saying that that's always the end result, but in many cases, sadly, it is.
Wow.
That's just a quote I saw. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So we are talking now,
Right.
but I
Yeah.
hope we'll begin to be doing, become more active, proactive, and in our awareness, in our youth fellowships, in our meetings, in our own families, in our own lives, and perhaps for some of us, we do need to confide in somebody. Maybe we have experienced childhood abuse in any of the five, and it doesn't have to be sexual or physical. It could be emotional neglect, because I know I've not talked on that in detail. Emotional neglect is when you maybe were not told you were loved. Maybe you were just left by yourself. Maybe your parents gave you lots of money. They bought you all the toys and etc. But they failed to relate with you. They failed to be able to understand you. They didn't want to understand you. Maybe you were just left with a tutor for the time, and they thought, well, we're paying for this tutor. What else you want? The driver is there to help you out. So you weren't able to explain to them when you were going for puberty, when you were being bullied, or you were not bullied. There's so many ways in which a child can be neglected,
Right.
and and it has damaging effects. Another cause of which a child could be neglected is when you do have a parent, like I said, maybe suffering from depression. Sometimes they're not able to give that emotional love, or there's an imbalance because they're just about coping. They're not able to express that in a way that is healthy for a child. So that child may grow up being neglected. So these are some of the ways. And the other ways in which I must draw our attention again, especially the faith communities, medication and taking our children to the hospital and all the other responsibilities we have. We know that in the Western country, what we will say Western, shall we say, nations, you're expected to take your children to the doctors, to the dentist for regular checkups. You know, and when the children are born, there's health visitor checkups as well. All these help towards the child to thrive well in their life, to see if there's any problems. We can't just say we're at home, we're taking them to the prayer house, you know, because sometimes in prayer houses where children get abused. Sometimes that's where the adult gets abused. So if a child needs to be seen by the doctor, yes, I'm not saying we can't pray. We should pray. But don't do that at the expense of seeking medical help intervention when you know that is required. Don't use your faith on your child if they need medication. unless there's a good reason. So I know a parent might have feel that there's a particular medication that's been prescribed or they've heard about that they feel their child could be allergic to. There's a discrepancy. Not everybody took the COVID jab for different reasons, and that's different. So we're not talking about that. When you hear that a particular prescription drug or medication might be detrimental, I mean, I understand that for a child that, for example, has ADHD, some children, it's not the best for them. So I'm not talking about those kind of examples, but I'm talking about it when you do it on your presumptions of your faith, and then you're neglecting your child. You don't let your child have that intervention. That can come down as a form of abuse.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. So here I've just given a few. These are just this is nothing really compared to the resources out there.
Hmm.
So NSPC, you know that they deal with cruelty to children, neglect. They talk about safeguarding. You can go onto their site, inform yourself, become informed. Um, you know, maybe you can get your children involved. They also have interactive material and resources for children. It could be a young person, and there are others. We have Mind, we have Ava. The other thing I have not, I don't know because of time, is when we have a young person who has been abused, what happens? How do we work with our young child? How do we cope? I believe that some of the ways in which we cope is to see, first of all, what it means to us as well, but also to get advice, to get support, to see what kind of organizations, whether there's anything that can help that young person, because we don't always have the skills within us. Sometimes the skills we become more equipped by gaining knowledge and understanding, and knowledge and understanding is not always within just our communities. Yes, we gain a lot from our various communities. So if I had a friend, I could talk to a friend, I could talk to an auntie, and etc. But sometimes we need to look online as well and see what there is to help us to gain that information so we
That's
can
right.
help that
Yeah.
young person. We might need to
Awesome.
go to support groups as well. So yeah,
Hmm.
just I'll let
It's good. It's actually good you mentioned that because sometimes people say they don't know who to turn to. Maybe family have tried their best and they don't really know. But as you said, there's so many resources out there that can help people. Yeah.
every area within Britain has. I'm not saying that everything answers your question or suits you to the letter, and we do know that for again, sometimes there's a lot of stereotypical, terminology out there, and we know sometimes they don't look at the cultural practices. They don't look at the stigma. Sometimes they don't address that. They don't address the fear, the taboos. They don't address where people feel that there's a spiritual connection to this, and the one that addressed. For example, I was trying to support somebody, and her abuse happened within a church setting from when she was young, and she felt that to recover, she needed somebody that she could trust again, but possibly not within the church setting, but someone who was of faith at the same time.
Right.
So I'm saying that if you probably went on to NSPC, NSPCC, they might not address that particular area. They might not address the pain, the the spirit, the feeling of abandonment, the spirit of feeling unclean, the feeling and the belief that some people have that that person had a bad spirit that brought it upon family dishonor. It's because maybe they came from the water, water spirits and the mammy water spirits. Some of these. So NSPC will not address that part
Mm.
of it. I can tell you that one. So you won't get everything, but at least you get some knowledge and information. You would also gain strength and knowledge about prosecution. I don't know if we
Mm.
all heard of this lady. She said I think she's got the title doctor. She's actually Nigerian. I don't have her name on my mind right now, but she appeared on, I think, BBC on the news because she actually got her mother prosecuted. Her mother went to jail. Now, many people say, never. How can you do that to your mother? How can you do that bad? This woman is a woman of faith. She didn't just do it because she wanted to teach her. She didn't do it because she wanted revenge. But it was just a consequence of reactions. When this woman was young, the beatings were so severe that at one point she had to go into hospital, probably more than once, with her head, cut, hair removed because of the beating, and but also she had a big wound in her scalp. To today, it's bald, nothing. That was the severity. So what I'm trying to say is that I know that the kind of criticism she received would be really untold. The sense of condemnation, that have you forgiven? And let's quickly bring this matter about forgiveness. Forgiveness is different from consequences. Forgiveness is a path it's an attitude that we have. And if you're someone that reads the Bible and obeys it, but it's mentioned in the Bible, but also psychologists are mentioning it. There's what you call the forgiveness therapy. Forgive yourself, forgive others, let go of them, and you get healed. But so we're not talking about that, but we are talking about consequences. We are talking about justice. We are talking about preventing, helping, healing our communities. And so sometimes there will be consequences that end in the court coming into play.
Okay. Wow.
So I said how abuse takes place and where. I have not covered everything. And you can see the 4 places there of what a happy, content, thriving child or environment can look like. A child can put their hand up in class. Me, miss, I know it. If you've got a child that is silenced by abuse, by ignoring that child, by being on your phone always, by always being on every prayer meeting and having no time to develop a bonding with your child, you don't know who's taking care of your child, you don't know whether they were bullied in school, you don't know what's going on, then how do they grow confident enough in school to answer questions? To be able to say, I know it, without a voice telling them, no, you don't know, who are you? You're nothing. You see the other one, the bonding, the girl on the father, presumably the father. You see the 2 siblings. You see another little girl looking at her homework confidently. So these are some of the thriving, flourishing situations we want our children to grow up in. If we didn't have it, we can still do better. And on your left, I've got some bullet points there. And I said we've identified the types of abuse, so we won't go into that one. Again, the one I will emphasize is the child witnessing domestic violence, because this is a big one today. I just want to say to us that there is a law out now that where a child witnesses domestic violence, that parent or persons are subjecting that child to child abuse. So yes, the child wasn't beaten, the child wasn't sworn, they didn't swear at the child, but the fact that the child's hearing the screaming, the shouting, the banging, it's doing damage, and there's a law to protect that child. In a sense that if the parent living in that environment doesn't get the perpetrator out or move away, then social services, if it continues, will probably take a view. I'm not saying they can do it in one day. They'll have to go through their boards, that child is being harmed and not being protected on that basis. And they can then get ways of removing the child, putting the child in foster care, or whatever they need to do. So again, I've said that we want our children to flourish and thrive and meet the developmental growth miles that have been assigned to them. And some of the signs, I just gave you a bit of emotional signs because I thought I should do that. So some of the signs are physiological, not, a child not walking, not speaking. Again, I think we could put a big disclaimer here again, but I'm saying it for our audience as well. Not every child who does not speak at 1 or 2 is exposed to domestic violence or abuse. Sometimes it's just a learning, like a learning disability, or they're going to speak later. But sometimes that is it, because a child could be muted. They can't speak where there's violence, where they're screaming and shouting and crying and banging. Some of them, and there's many more to that as well. Then the emotional signs are unable to eat, sleep, restlessness, wetting, going, bedwetting, um, this all sorts of distressful behaviors that show this is the distress. Educational signs, not able to concentrate at school. A child that was up wondering whether daddy's going to beat mommy, whether mommy will be alive. Do you think that child's going to go to have a good night's rest and then go to school and concentrate? No, they're not likely to. So there's always a consequence. Behavioral. Now this is one that I think affects a lot of our young black, I'll call them boys, but we know they're men. I call them boys because they're still in their 15, 16, 17. Behavior, hyperactivity, especially sometimes in church, they're always jumping around. Now that could be a positive thing, that could be their nature, it could be they've got a very chirpy behavior, but sometimes there's a sign that something within them is not at peace. There's something not right. And that could be the sign of it's always jumping, or they could be totally slow. And again, we know there could be medical reasons. It could be just that's just a person, but it could be because they're numb. They are numbed by the pain of the trauma. Then we've got, sorry for the spelling there, physical signs. Oh, I didn't spell it correctly. Physical signs, which could be bruising, injuries, sudden mobility problems. We all heard of Baby P and Victoria Columbia's story years ago. And we know that with the physical injuries, there would have been some things like mobility problems, but the parents probably would have lied. Oh, it's because of that. Oh, she stepped over, because she hurt herself on her, and on the when she was trying to walk, and there'll always be excuses that the parents can give. But really and truly, sometimes there are physical signs. I must say another physical sign which I didn't put there is where the child, because they are hating their body. So it's what I call self-harm. So you normally see that in an older child where they've slashed their wrist, or they've got scratches, you know, or they're banging their heads, or they're doing anything that affects them. Okay. Another one is eating disorders. We've mentioned that. Another one is sleeping disorders. And there are so many other issues. That is just it. Fighting's another one. Aggression, anger, fear, fear of going to place, fear of certain people, fear of maybe anything that can remind them, of what they've experienced. And yeah, so there's so many ways that, that you can sometimes begin to think, could this be what I'm thinking? But also, let's not forget the most common one where a child tries to tell you and express it in different ways
Yeah.
that there's something wrong.
Mm.
Let's look for the things where they say verbally, the verbal communication, and the non-verbal, even if it doesn't seem to make sense to us.
Mm. Awesome. And right. Um, Ibironke, this has been just fantastic, and I like the look on that. Is that a kind of look that we should all be aspiring? I mean, for those parents at that stage, too, in terms of relationship.
I think so. And I would say that if we've got problems as adults, maybe we were abused as children, it doesn't mean that we have to let the legacy, we don't make
Mm.
it become a legacy. We can
Okay.
create something by getting help. If
Mm.
we've already abused our spouses, don't live in it. Don't live in shame, but live and get help, because I'm aware and I do believe in somebody being able to change. But what is wrong is when we refuse to change, when we give excuses and say it doesn't help. I beat her because she deserved it. She made me angry, made you angry. But if King Charles, let's say, because the Queen is passed now, I know the Queen was a favorite to many people, but let's say King Charles, if you have respect for him, was to appear at your doorstep where you're screaming on your wife or your husband or your spouse, would you continue screaming, or you say, "Oh, it's nice to see you, Your Honor, why are you doing that?" You would stop. You can control it. I always say this thing as well to people who say that, "Oh, I had no control when it comes to such sexual abuse." Sorry, if that person turned into a snake, you would have control. So what
Hmm.
is it's to do with your inhibitions that you do. What are your stand? What are your values? We can. It's only someone that is really, really mentally unwell, and then generally they are sectioned or they're on some kind of medication or injection. Then we know that okay, they have no control at this stage. So we can, and so we can make it a better environment for ourselves.
Awesome. Ibironke, this has been super fantastic. And for anybody who wants to get in touch with her, her email is there. It's also already in the description in case you want to reach out to her. I thank Ibironke for coming because of her versatility. One of the greatest things is obviously her lived experience, which she was happy to share on this platform. That's one thing that a lot of people wouldn't do, but a story shared is already taking out some of that's one way to help a healing process. But not just that, but all the different roles she also played in the professional world as well. So please reach out to her and benefit from what she has. I know from last week she also talked about a journal to help people and all that. Yes, that is still available. You can see it in the description below. And so thank you, Ibironke, and our audience for joining us. If you've got any questions, any things you want us to address, please let Ibironke know, or you can also drop us an email at frontdesk@mediaworksglobal um, .tv, and I'll put the link in the chat as well for you. But Ibironke, once again, thank you. So I can't thank you enough for these sessions that we've had. If you watch the video, I think you'd enjoy the benefit of her explaining through the slides, which is even better than just having it for yourself. But of course, we'll put a link as well after tonight's episode in the description, so you can also pick it up if you need to share it with somebody else. To our audience, thank you for joining us tonight again on this episode of Prime Focus. And we believe that you've been made aware and educated a lot more and are primed to take some action. Thank you for joining us as we bring tonight's program to a close.